Academic freedom is a fundamental value of democracy. If universities are threatened, so is democracy. When Central European University, based in Budapest, became the center of a political campaign in 2017, it quickly became clear this will be an issue not only about CEU, but about Europe and what it stands for. In 2017, the Hungarian government introduced a new bill that aims to regulate foreign universities. The bill was pretty much designed to aim at CEU, which in the following years tried to fight it and finally decided to move its campus to Vienna. It is with great pleasure that I'm now introducing my next guest on our ZEIT für Bildung conference, the President of Central European University, Michael Ignatieff. Hello, Michael, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
We're meeting via Zoom. I wonder where you are, in Vienna or in Budapest?
I'm in my library about 2 hours from Budapest by the shores of Lake Balaton, which I know many people will know is a beautiful place. It is indeed a beautiful place.
We met in 2019, I think, when I was reporting on CEU, and I visited you in your office. And I remember you have a sign on your desk. It says, "Keep it simple." How does one keep things simple if they're actually complicated?
Yeah, it's been anything but simple. We've been in a battle with the Orban government since 2017 for one simple reason, which is that the Prime Minister of Hungary decided his election prospects depended on going after and identifying George Soros, the founder of our university, as a target. There was never a question about our academic program. There was never a question about whether we were a good university. It was always a straight political attack on our very existence in Hungary. The battle went on, as you say in your introduction, until we decided we had to reestablish ourselves in Vienna, and we've now done so, although we retain a campus in Budapest. This is the complicated part. We retain a research unit, a library, a democracy institute, which we're very proud of, but we're not allowed to teach in Budapest our US accredited degree programs, and that's what we've moved to Vienna. But the complication is that the European Court of Justice reviewed the legislation throwing us out of the country and decided it ruled that it violated European law and European human rights law. So basically, the law is now null and void in Hungary, and we have to decide what we do about that. But we're taking it very, very slowly to wait for retaliatory measures, presumably to be taken by the Orban government.
So when the European Court of Justice ruled that Lex CEU was incompatible with European law in October, this was, did that feel like a victory to you?
Well, it's a bittersweet victory. We could have used a court judgment prohibiting this forced expulsion 2 years ago. And so a lot of people said justice delayed is justice denied. I don't quite feel that. I think it was an important vindication. And for purposes of this discussion, it was a very important vindication of the jurisprudence of academic freedom. And that may sound a little abstract, but in years to come, decades to come, thanks to this judgment, it'll be much more difficult for another European regime to try the same game that Viktor Orban played with us. I think it'll be much more difficult for any future single-party ruler to try and throw a university out of a European state. So in that sense, it is a victory.
You mentioned that in Vienna, you're actually developing a large campus that is supposed to open in 2025. So what changes now? Will you be full front ahead in Vienna? Or what is your take on this? And also, what do students think and professors? Do they want to move on to Vienna and or go back to Budapest?
Well, look, it's tough. You know, universities are rooted in the places they were founded. We were rooted in Budapest. Our allegiance to Budapest and to Hungary was very deep. I happen to be married to a Hungarian. I love the country, but the political atmosphere is absolutely toxic and poisonous here. Just over the weekend, somebody compared George Soros to Hitler, said that the European campaign against Hungary and Poland was the gas chamber. I'm not exaggerating, the gas chamber for Hungary, for Hungarian culture, comparing Hungary to the Jews of the Holocaust. I mean, it's just, there is simply no limit to what this regime and its supporters will say about the founder of the university, but against the leaders of Europe, against the Chancellor of Germany, against the head of the European Commission. This is a regime entirely without scruple, restraint, or any sense of decency, let alone historical understanding. So it's simply impossible to operate as a free institution here. And it's not just us, by the way. The Academy of Sciences, the most distinguished establishment, academic establishment in Hungary, was effectively muzzled by the government. A university of television and theater arts has basically been taken over. Universities across Hungary have been put under the control of government appointees. So academic freedom has been very substantially throttled in a European member state. And I think that the candid reality is that the German government's imperative, the French government's imperative, the European Commission's imperative is to keep the European show going and arrive at a compromise that essentially sacrifices their commitment to rule of law and academic freedom. And I'm here to say that's a very bad thing to do, because sooner or later, you end up with a Europe with real tyrants on your doorstep. On the doorstep of Hungary, on the doorstep of Germany. That's not good for German security. It's not good for European peace. I'm sorry to make it sound so strong, but it really is a serious matter, and it's being decided as this conference is being held. And it seems evident that the German government, for reasons that are perfectly understandable, just thinks we've got to keep the show on the road, and so let's compromise with Hungary and Poland. The consequences of that will be felt in Europe for generations. And so I'm raising my single voice and the voice of some other people to say, don't do that. It's absolutely crucial for academic freedom, which is the subject of this discussion, that it be linked to rule of law. You can't have academic freedom unless you have rule of law. Academic freedom is part of rule of law. The two go together. If you sacrifice the rule of law, there will be no academic freedom in Poland or in Hungary. And this is why making respect for the rule of law, minimum standards of rule of law, independent judiciary, that kind of thing, making those the precondition for European funding of these countries is simply essential.
Are you disappointed, especially by Angela Merkel? She's a scientist, and she would say academic freedom is crucial. Still, she didn't intervene fully against Viktor Orban on this matter.
Well, I don't want to prejudge the outcomes. I'm praying that before the final European Council meeting in December, during the German presidency, that she'll put her foot down. She's a woman that I think every European should respect. I respect her greatly. And I know that she's a scientist she doesn't need to be told why universities matter and why academic freedom matters. You don't need to give her a lecture on that subject. But she's, I think, got the very difficult choice between prioritizing European unity at any price, getting the budget through at any price, and the defense of rule of law and academic freedom. And I just plead with her and with the German elites to understand how serious the consequences will be if she does a deal that simply abandons rule of law, because what will then follow is academic freedom will go. Any restraint on police will go. At the moment, there are no political prisoners in Hungary and Poland, but there could be, we could slide right back to the bad old communist days unless this is stopped. So this is a moment in which what Europe means needs to be defended clearly. And the Chancellor of Germany is the person who has to make this call. And I hope she makes the right call.
And who else in Europe is an important voice in this matter? Which countries are you looking at when you're voicing this critique?
Clearly, France is important. I understand also that it's very important for Northern Europe and Southern Europe to be together. I understand clearly how desperate the Spanish are, the Portuguese, the Italians are for the aid that could come through if this budget comes through. I can understand that they are saying, look, don't hold us hostage to doing the right thing about Hungary and Poland. I get the politics. I was once in politics myself. Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, political leadership comes down to making difficult choices. This is a difficult choice. But if you sacrifice academic freedom and rule of law today, you'll sacrifice Europe tomorrow. It'll go, right? People need to understand this thing isn't an eternal fact of European politics. This continent has been racked by a return to nationalist authoritarianism, and Europe has paid a horrendous price for allowing that to happen. Don't let it happen again.
What happens to European countries if we lose academic freedom? I mean, not only what happens to the people working in academia and the students, but to the whole society.
Well, you know, academic freedom is part of wider freedoms. I mean, in Hungary at the moment, there is almost no independent media. 85 to 90% of the media is controlled by friends of the government or government agencies. You go after the universities first, which is what they did, then you go after the media, and slowly a kind of cloud begins to settle on a whole country. People talk in whispers. People look around and don't have political conversations in restaurants. People decide, I'm going to stay out of politics. I just want to live my private life. Everything becomes privatized, silent, conspiratorial, and a free society slowly strangles. This is what's happening. So it's not just about universities or even principally about university. It's about European freedom.
In terms of the student body, CEU is a small university, and it has a very high reputation. So this is just one small university, one could argue. But are you afraid that this whole topic about academic freedom could interfere also with the reputation of CEU, so that something sticks to the university of a bad reputation that Orban tries to put on you?
Sure. I mean, our academic friends and colleagues in Germany and around Europe, Sciences Po in Paris and Bocconi in Milan and Hertie in Berlin, they know us. They know that we're a serious social science and humanities university. We're small, but we're pretty good. We'd like to be better. We're not a political organization. I'd hate being in this situation where I have to go on banging on about politics. I'd rather, I'm a historian by training. I'd rather be doing historical research. There is a risk that CEU becomes associated with this battle to the exclusion of everything else, and people forget that we're actually a university. We're not an NGO. I'm not here to campaign for George Soros. I'm not here to campaign against Viktor Orban. I want to be left alone. That's the only thing. And I think the university, all of us at the university, want to be left alone to be what we should be, which is a university.
Have you recognized any changes in student enrollments? I mean, in terms of the number, but also who is trying to apply to CEU?
No, I don't think we've had a problem with that. Our enrollments have not gone down. In fact, during the crisis, because we became rather well known, our enrollments went up. So that's an ironic result. But look, universities are everywhere going through COVID-19. It's been traumatic experience. Universities are communities. And when you can't meet in the corridor, when you can't meet over a coffee, when you can't meet face to face, the effect is atomizing. Universities are not are communities, and they're communities of flesh and blood. And I think all universities across Europe are feeling this sense of atomization and even disintegration. And so my job is to keep us all together. And let me tell you, it ain't easy.
How do you do that? How do you keep a university together if you can't, hang out in the library or say hi to a colleague next door?
Well, I think you have to address the problem. I'm about to have a meeting of the whole university tomorrow in which I'll talk about this. Zoom meetings are no substitute for a community. We've come to the very limit of what a digital community can achieve. And now we've discovered that digital community is no substitute for a real one, especially in a university where, as teaching is an artisanal business. It's, one table at a time, one fork at a time, one student at a time, one soul at a time. It depends on eye-to-eye contact between a teacher and a student, the flash of recognition when knowledge is transmitted and received. I mean, this is what makes universities such exciting places. But you can't replicate that on Zoom, and we all know that. I think every university in Europe has made a magnificent adaptation to circumstances beyond our control, but any university that's honest thinks this has been terrible, and we want to be over it as soon as possible. And I'm hoping with 3 vaccines, some of which, let me point out, were developed at universities. One of the AstraZeneca vaccine was developed at Oxford. God bless Oxford. God bless academic research in universities. I know that the German vaccine had contributions from German academic life. The public needs to understand that we do stuff that is a matter of life and death. And we should be intensely proud as university people of the contribution we've made to understanding the pandemic and trying to get us out the other side.
We've talked about academic freedom in the sense that it can be threatened by governments or political leaders. There are also in the United States and in Europe discussions about a different kind of threat, the question whether freedom of speech is endangered on campus. For example, if invited speakers face protests. And I'd be interested to hear your take on this. Is freedom of speech on campus something you're worried about?
Yeah, I certainly am. I think it's a live issue. And I know that liberal progressive people sometimes think this is a problem invented by the conservatives or right wing. Unfortunately, I don't think that's true. I've had a couple of occasions at my university in which I felt students walked out of lectures before the lectures were given because they objected to positions taken by the lecturers. And I thought that was a terrible mistake and said so. And I have said repeatedly that universities are places where sometimes you ought to listen to stuff you don't like and don't agree with. And the idea that, the old English phrase, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me, is both true and untrue. It's untrue in the sense that words can be deeply hurtful and damaging, but they're not physical assault. And we need to keep distinctions clear. And it seems to me the other thing we need to be clear about is that when a university invites someone to speak, they're not conferring a cardinal's hat on the head of the speaker. They're not conferring authority and legitimacy on the speaker. They are simply saying, this is a person worth listening to. Now, that is what is called platforming. And platforming thinks if you platform somebody, you're immediately endorsing everything that comes out of their mouth. And that's absurd and never been true. And so universities do have to take their responsibilities for platforming speakers, but they need to say to both sides of their communities, look, we're platforming, yes, so sit down and listen and shut up till he's finished. I mean, it is bothering me, and there's a lot of it. There's also a weird way in which people are saying, I can't listen to this stuff because it attacks my identity. I'm so vulnerable that I can't listen to this stuff because I can't be in the room with this stuff. I mean, I think we need to teach people.
Isn't that coming from groups who feel marginalized or have felt marginalized for a long time and now feel like there's a platform for other voices as well?
Well, it's extremely important that we platform as diverse a range of voices as possible, that no one is excluded, that everyone is heard, yes. But the idea that some people have suffered discrimination, marginalization, and therefore need to be specially protected, seems to me to be condescending to them in some way. And a university can't protect people in a kind of condescending desire to shelter people. Speech is tough, opinions are tough, reason is tough, books make you cry, arguments make you furious. That's the nature of intellectual life. And I don't want to be too aggressive about this, but President Harry Truman said, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen.
Do you think that universities have become too politicized in recent years so that the debate, the kitchen is on fire?
Yeah. I think it's appropriate that universities are at the center of public debate. I think the idea of an ivory tower in which we're removed from these controversies is both unrealistic and actually undesirable. But I do think universities need to be much prouder and more assertive of their history as places in which vigorous dissent and public debate is held in a safe space. The battle of ideas is also not a battle of physical bodies. These university has to keep the peace between contending ideas and contending visions of the world. But that's the nature of a pluralist society. In Germany, there are many, many strands of opinion in a diverse society. It's the glory of the freedom that Germany's achieved since 1945. It's a precious thing to safeguard the plurality, the range, the diversity of opinion. And newcomers to your country have added immeasurably to the country. They need to be heard. People who've been silenced need to be heard. Universities have a role in making that possible, and we need to step up. But when we start enforcing speech codes, when we start protecting our delicate little students from things they don't want to hear, when we allow people to shout other people down, we're betraying our function as custodians of academic freedom.
I know you're a historian, but let's look into the future. What will Central European University look like in 2030?
Well, I'd like to say that we will have revived the Austro-Hungarian Empire in all its good aspects. There were terrible aspects to Austro-Hungary, but there were some good ones. That there will be a very strong campus in Vienna on Steinhof. That campus will have played its role in healing the wounds that were left by some terrible things that were done in Steinhof during the Nazi period. There will also be a campus in Budapest. We will be a social science and humanities university that likes to think of itself as providing the best degrees in its fields in Europe in the English language. We'll be very closely networked in the German-speaking world, much more strongly than we are now, because we're now in a German-speaking city. And we will be small still. I think small is beautiful in graduate education. I don't want to be a huge place. I'd like us to be small, maybe 3,000, maybe 4,000 students tops, but not larger. And we'll be full, as we are today, of cantankerous, difficult, self-important people who actually happen to be brilliant at what they do. And, we'll welcome people from every country, color, religion, faith, sexual orientation in the world. And out of this mixture of people, we'll try and create a learning community that contributes to our societies.
Allow me a final personal question. A while ago, you've written an essay in our newspaper about consolation, Trost. This has been a year of crisis, of many deaths, of loss. I wonder what gives you comfort these days? Where do you find hope?
Well, look behind me, look at the library, look at the books. I derive enormous comfort from my beloved wife, from my cats, from a good glass of wine, but most of all from the books behind me. These have been my companions and my friends. I've written a book about consolation, which is mostly about the wisdom and comfort that great men and women faced with adversity much worse than the adversity we're facing have brought the reflection they brought to their suffering, their adversity, their loss, and the ways in which their wisdom can help us today. I just, I wouldn't be in university life if I didn't believe in the power of the books behind me.
And which one do you recommend?
Well, right now, I don't know. It's so hard to choose.
I know, just one.
I think if I have to choose one, it's Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, because he wrote the Meditations while he was in a camp around this part of the world, in Pannonia, in Hungary, and possibly in Serbia, fighting a brutal counterinsurgency war with the barbarian tribes, or what they called the barbarian tribes, trying to keep up his courage. His empire is ravaged by the plague. A third of his population die during his time as emperor. He's old. He's knows his days are numbered. And he's writing for himself late at night at the end of brutally long days as the emperor of the known world. And there's something poignant and deeply moving about his attempt to be honest with himself. And it's a pretty powerful testament to the endurance and resilience of the human spirit.
Michael Ignatieff, thank you very much for this interview.
Pleasure.